Welcome to How to Create an Azure Functions resource. In this video, we're going to describe using resource groups as logical containers, foundational part of using Azure at all. Everything's part of a resource group, and we want to make sure that you understand how they function. And we're going to create an Azure Function resource or an Azure Function app, and then I'll show you how to create a function from a template. Resource groups are fundamental to all things in Azure. Everything that you create, whether it's a logic app or a virtual machine, it all belongs to a resource group. It only belongs to one, and everything belongs to a resource group. This would be an example of really using no logic to arrange your resources in your resources groups. Here, we could have all of our resources in a single resource group. And of course, this is doable, and it does give you nothing to think about as far as what should I do for a resource group? Should I add another resource group? If you just put everything into one resource group, everything is going to function just fine. The problem is that you really don't have a good way of managing or handling, especially the disposal of these resources. Also, you notice that I had the resources there and then put the resource group around it. But that's not really the way it would work. In fact, everything has a resource group. So what's typical is that you'll create your first Azure resource and you'll give it a resource group. And then as things come in, you start adding more resources. And finally, you decide to populate them into your resource group. Soon you've got several resources, and this can be a fine way of doing it, except that there's no way of identifying something that is bundled together, say the virtual machine and the SQL database. If those two identify as part of single application, it makes sense that they go together into their own resource group. This would be a more typical and a more logical way of bundling those resources together into resource groups. The resource group for a web app and a resource group for NoSQL or logic. You could see that when it comes time to get rid of some of those resources, you won't be left with forgetting that the virtual machine and the SQL database were also used with that storage account. And if you don't have the SQL database anymore, you no longer need the virtual machine and the Azure storage account. So bundling those things together into a single resource group makes a lot of sense, and it will go far for managing your resources later on. So let's have a demo to create a resource group, an Azure Function app, and the function from the template. Here we are in the Azure portal. I've signed in and we have just an empty dashboard here. No resources created yet, and resource groups are here. I've also thinned out my long list of favorites to work with just the resources that we'll be using. Notice that I don't have a resource group, and if you want to go ahead and create those resource groups ahead of time, it's easy to do. Here we can create an Azure Functions resource group in our free trial subscription, and in the resource group will be in Central US. A few things about the resource groups is that they don't have to be in the same location for all of your resources. You can have a resource group that's in Central US, but the resources could be all over the globe. The next is that resource groups are really a logical way of handling your resources. There's no pricing for this resource group. You can have as many resource groups as you want, and when we refresh, we have an Azure Functions resource group. If you try to delete, it will want a confirmation, because this could be very impactful if you have lots of resources in here. While it's processing, up here we'll have a notification, and it's identifying that we have something going on here with the blue line going through it. So deleting resource group Azure Functions. We also have a notification that the resource group that we were creating was created successfully. The reason deleting this now is because I wanted to make sure that you knew that you did not have to create all of your resource groups ahead of time. We can go to Function Apps and see all of the function apps that are available to us. One thing to note is that in the Function Apps page, there is no click a button and create a function app. However, you can create a resource and select serverless function app, you can also search for a function and select Function App. Click Create. We'll give it a name. Your app name needs to be unique, and when you enter in your app name, it will verify for you that the app is available. Here we can create a new resource group, and we can give it the name. You can give it a different name, or you can choose the name that was already selected for you. We can choose a consumption plan or an app service plan. In this case, we're going to use the consumption plan. The storage account is required because that's where the function's code is going to be stored. We can create a new storage account, and we'll use the default name. We'll leave the application insights off for now. Again, the deployment is in progress, and we see the notification window spinning up there. Once the deployment is complete and our function app has been created, we'll be able to see it here in our resources. We'll also see it listed in the function apps. And here we can just wait for it to show up. As soon as the deployment is completed, I'll refresh and we can go to the next video. Our deployment is now complete, and if we refresh our function apps, we can see our function app sitting here. Clear out our notifications. The individual functions are the core resource as part of the function app. So let's create a new function from template. Pre-made functions are available: webhooks, timer, or data processing, and you can choose your language. Functions, of course, are the bread and butter of our function apps. So let's go ahead and create a function. We'll click here. You can either click the plus sign next to the functions or click New Function. You can choose a template or go to the Quick Start. Quick Start is available, and you would choose to switch over to the templates. You can get started on your own with a custom function. You can search by what type of function you want, or you could filter by the languages that you're going to use. In this case, we're going to use an HTTP trigger. The language is specified. We give it a name, and we set an authorization level, either for the function to be used or anonymous. And that's all that's needed to build a function from a template. In the next video, we'll create a storage account so that we can use blobs, tables, and queues.